Begin with the incredible and momentous scenes today at the Vatican and the election of a new pope, a cardinal from the United States, now the first American-born pope. This was the moment as the white smoke billowed out of the chimney of the Sistine Chapel. Crowds that gathered in St. Peter's Square erupting in cheers at the sign that the 133 cardinal electors chose a new leader of the Roman Catholic Church as bells from the basilica rang out. Listen to that crowd. The pomp continued as color guards and marching bands made their way through St. Peter's Square and the excited crowds before assembling in front of the basilica. Several moments later, the senior cardinal deacon appeared on St. Peter's balcony, declaring Habemus Papam, which means we have a pope in Latin, and announcing to the world who the cardinals elected and the name he will take as pope.
Habemus Papam. Eminentissimum, ac reverendissimum Dominum, Dominum Robertum Franciscum, Sancte Romane Ecclesiae, Cardinalem Prevost, qui sibi nomen imposuit Leonem decimum quartum.
And then came the moment millions of people had been waiting for, the first appearance of Pope Leo XIV before the entire world, waving to the thousands of people gathered in the square before delivering his first remarks as Pope, speaking in Italian and Spanish, emphasizing the need to be a church that builds bridges and is open to receive everyone. Among the thousands gathered in St. Peter's Square were several Americans who were just ecstatic about the news of an American Pope.
First of all, just as a Catholic, to have a new Holy Father, that's exciting enough. But then to find out that he's a Chicagoan as well, I could not believe it. That was something we were always told could never happen. There could never be an American Pope.
My phone is just beeping constantly right now from home saying, American Pope, American Pope. It's exciting.
Proud, just very proud. I mean, just incredible.
It's going to be something that's incredibly unifying for us as a country.
This historic moment all happening on day 2 of the conclave. The official news agency of the Vatican says the cardinals elected the Pope on the 4th ballot after 2 inconclusive votes earlier this morning. Joining me now is NBC's Claudio Lavanga at the Vatican. Adrienne Broaddus is in Chicago. Also with me is Joe Donnelly, former U.S. Senator to Indiana and former U.S. Ambassador to the Holy See, and Father Robert Hagan, a friend of Pope Leo and an Augustinian Prior Provincial. Thanks to all of you for being here. Claudio, let me start with you. Take us to that historic moment when a new pope was announced.
Well, Kristen, this was only 3 hours ago, and there are still people here. You probably can see them behind me because they're still taking in this historic moment. It was a shocking moment, probably, because not many people up to 3 hours ago expected or thought that it was possible that an American will become Pope simply because of the concentration of power. But in a way, as the Italian media is saying right now, Prevost is the least American of the American cardinals, in the sense that, yes, he was born in Chicago in 1955, but in the end, he spent 2/3 of his life outside of the United States. He went as a 30-year-old as a missionary to Peru. He spent many years there. Then he was called back to Rome by Pope Francis, who made him a cardinal only a little over 2 years ago, so very fresh even there. He called him back to Rome to assign him to lead the office that appoints bishops around the world. So he's both a missionary, so he's a pastor that goes to the peripheries, something that Pope Francis really cared about. At the same time, he also knows the ins and outs of the Catholic, the church's governance here. And also he knows the cardinals and the bishops around the world, as he was in charge of appointing the bishops. And that could have helped him, perhaps, because 80% of the cardinals who took part in this conclave were new to the conclave. They were appointed by Pope Francis, and also they were new to each other. They didn't really know each other because they come from all over the world. And perhaps Prevost was one of very few they actually knew and trusted. And this could have helped him. And clearly, this vote went very fast. It was only the fourth vote, as you mentioned, something that also we didn't expect because of that, because the cardinals didn't know each other very well. But clearly, Prevost, now Pope Leo XIV, had already the trust of all of them. So we are looking forward to see what Leo will do in the coming days.
Certainly, there is no doubt the world will be watching, Claudio. What did his first words that he spoke from the balcony there tell us about what type of pope he may be?
He spoke about peace, first of all. He repeated the word peace many times. He talked about a disarm and disarming peace. He talked about building bridges. He talked about a church that is inclusive for everyone. And he spoke in 3 different languages, Latin, Italian, and Spanish, because this is also a very global pope. He speaks more languages than that. He speaks English, of course, Italian, Spanish, Latin, Portuguese, and even understands German. This makes him a pope that is truly global, that can talk to 3/4 of the world's population and probably most of the Catholic population, most of the 1.4 billion Catholics. And that is very important because the church is globalized, the church is global, and this truly is a global pope who was born in the United States, but he's truly global, Kristen.
You know, it was so fascinating, Claudio, because from the time that we saw that white smoke, and obviously you heard the cheers start to erupt in St. Peter's Square, to the time that we actually met the new pope, it was about an hour. What happens in that time? Why is there that stretch of time before the world gets to actually see the new pope?
Well, because the Pope, of course, once he's asked whether he accepts the role, of course, as Pope, and he says, I accepto, the Latin for I accept, he is then taken to a sacristy behind the Sistine Chapel, where that's called the Room of Tears, because popes usually weep when they see the white cassock. Then he's being dressed as Pope, and then he returns to the Sistine Chapel where he takes the homage of the cardinals and so forth. So that process takes about an hour. And also this allows hundreds of thousands of people here in Rome to run to the Vatican. This is the scene that we've seen. This is my third conclave, and this is the most moving moment all the time. When I see people making a dash from everywhere, they drop anything they're doing in Rome because they hear the bells from all over the city, and they come here to the Vatican to witness this moment where the Pope appears on the balcony, Christy.
The images are just breathtaking to watch. It was such a historic and momentous day. Claudio, thank you for being there for us. Adrienne, let's turn to you in Chicago. I am getting text messages from everyone I know, including some of my family who hails from Chicago. What is the scene there? I know there's a lot of pride for folks there today.
So much pride on display, Kristen, and the element of surprise has started to settle, and now there's just pure joy and excitement. When we pulled up to Holy Name Cathedral, which you see behind me, the bells were ringing. Folks were gathering on the steps, just celebrating. We met a group of students from a nearby suburb who were here for a tour. They were inside of the church when the news was announced, and it spread quickly, and they were overwhelmed with enthusiasm. We did speak to some of the students, including their parents. Take a listen.
I am very excited that he has some of the same values that, Pope Francis did. I think, it's really going to help open up Catholicism to all people and, in a more way of inclusion rather than exclusion.
So much excitement. Her son, we also spoke with, who is 12 years old. He says he would love to be Pope one day, but right now he's just taking in the moment of the new Pope. And he says if he's not Pope, at least he lived to see an American Pope, and that is something he wants to tell his children and grandchildren about, Kristen.
Well, it's important to dream big, and love hearing that reaction there from Chicago. Adrienne, thank you so much. Ambassador Donnelly, let me head over to you. What was your reaction to learning for the first time ever an American Pope was chosen?
It was just incredible because everybody's always said, well, an American can't be Pope. And the trick for Pope Leo is that the word on him was he's the least American of the Americans. What they meant by that was, you know, he was in South America, he was in other places, and he had a special gift in that, I think in the conclave, you know, where people can get somewhat divided, whether you're conservative or progressive or this or that. I think both sides liked him, that they both sides were comfortable with him, where some of the other candidates, they might say it's too this much, too that way. Both sides were comfortable with him, and that helped to create a lot of momentum. He was the kind of candidate that you would say, if he wasn't an American, I think he would have been the clear front runner. And so, you know, that's why he spoke in Spanish and to his parish in Peru, or his diocese in Peru. I laughed. I was like, I think everybody's in Chicago waiting to hear you talk to them next.
I was wondering if English was going to follow.
Yeah, probably not.
Yeah, we didn't get English today, but it was incredible to hear from him. Are you surprised that the Cardinals were able to elect a pope on the fourth ballot, given there was a lot of discussion about how many Cardinals were meeting for the first time and the fact that there were so many different languages being spoken in that conclave for the first time?
I think when we hear the history of this conclave, we're going to hear that a lot of this was done before the conclave ever started. And what I mean by that is they have that time between the funeral and the conclave where they are having meals together and meeting together and talking and going to different things. I think a lot of this was set in motion and put in place before the conclave ever started, so that when they had the first vote, I may be wrong, but I think Pope Leo had a really strong position after the first vote as well.
Well, we know that Pope Francis and President Trump did not see eye to eye on a lot of things. President Trump is out celebrating this moment. He spoke about this moment, the fact that there is an American Pope. What are you anticipating from this relationship that we will undoubtedly at some point, President Trump will go to meet the new Pope? What do you expect their relationship will be like?
Well, you can see Pope Leo is very comfortable in who he is and very confident. And so I think that he will bring his views to that relationship. He will have a spine of steel. And you could hear in his comments today that he has what's called the preferential option for the poor, that he stands up for those who are struggling. And his other comments that evil will not win. So he comes at this with a lot of the same views of Francis. I think he wants to have a terrific relationship with President Trump, and that'll sort itself out as we go through various issues.
Well, Ambassador Donnelly, thank you so very much. We really appreciate your being here on this historic day. Father Hagan, let me turn to you. You are actually friends with now Pope Leo. I cannot imagine what this day has been like for you. You see the raw emotion there at the Vatican from all of the faithful who had gathered to celebrate this moment. What is in your heart today?
Just incredible joy. I have to tell you, when he appeared on that balcony, it was as if a family member had stepped up there. And I mean that as a brother Augustinian. On behalf of all the Augustinians around the world, we know the kind of man that the world just got. And he is all that. He is incredibly bright. He's a peacemaker. He has a sense of humor. He's welcoming and approachable. And so the man that we know, the man that has served the poor, the man who has traveled around the world doing God's work, we believe, the Cardinals were in that conclave, but we also believe it's driven by the Holy Spirit, that ultimately the decision is God's will. And so we believe that God had a major hand in what happened here. And we're just so happy that the world is going to have a Holy Father in Pope Leo, in the caliber person that he is.
What do you make of the name that he chose? What does it symbolize? What should people know about that?
I think, certainly embracing the people on the margins, a sensitivity for the poor. Pope Francis spoke a lot about the word synodality. and to listen. I think what we have here in Pope Leo is someone who is willing to listen to all voices, to voices of the poor, to voices that maybe are not always heard, and as a real collaborator and unifier. And so I think in the name Leo, you know, that carries on that kind of legacy and tradition.
And what can you tell us about his work in Peru and beyond, and how that might shape his papacy, what you have seen so far in the work?
As you can imagine, there are towns and cities in Peru that are poor. They don't have a lot of resources. You know, I think we celebrate, particularly in our country, we celebrate the value of independence, right? We celebrate our independence. I think we can also celebrate our dependence. We certainly found that in COVID. The need that we all have for one another, the need that we have to defer to our higher power, the need and call that we have to help one another. And I think when you work in communities where they don't have a lot, you understand that value, that's incumbent upon us to serve one another. And I think that was indelibly marked on his heart and his soul and in his work. And I think that Pope Francis recognized that when he chose to make him a cardinal in the first place. And so I think we can expect that sensitivity to those who are struggling on the margins to continue.
With the final minute that we have left, a lot of challenges facing the Catholic Church right now. How do you think he will approach those challenges, Father?
Well, you know, as we know, God gave him an incredible intellect. And so he has a capacity for a depth of critical thinking. But I also think that he's not condescending. And so while he's bright, I think he's also going to, as we said, listen to the collective wisdom that comes from the flock, from the faithful, and from, you know, his council, the people that he will look to help him lead. And so I think you're going to have somebody that is going to be a collaborator and really to, you know, really lean on the collective wisdom of on the shoulders of the people that he stands, but with the courage to now go forward and really strive to do what God may be asking him to do with the, you know, the balance of his life.
Father Robert Hagan, thank you so much for joining us, for bringing us your very personal perspective on this monumental day. We really appreciate your joining us.
Thank you, Kristen.
Coming up, the Trump administration is close to sealing its first major trade deal with a top U.S. ally since announcing sweeping tariffs on dozens of nations. We have the details on the U.K. agreement and what it means for negotiations with China. Don't go anywhere. You're watching Meet the Press now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.